So I can't remember if I talked about this before, but every one of my patterns, or pretty much every one, I like to start with a piece of graphing paper or square paper. One thing I did when I first started was I was marking everything directly onto the leather, and not only do you get scratch marks and shit all over it, but it never quite turns out being how you want it. So I have made wallets in this style before, and I have all the tools necessary to make it, and I even have a pattern here of this wallet, which I can reuse this because the pockets themselves are going to stay the same. Main thing is just working out the overall dimensions of the inside, and then the outside is just going to be that slightly bigger, because this is going to be a bifold, so we do need 2 layers essentially, one of which is going to be able to wrap on the outside and just be able to keep it closed. The reason I'm making this wallet actually is a good friend of mine, an old friend from England, reached out to me looking for something which could not only hold cards and cash like usual, but a passport as well. And he had a very clear picture in mind of what he wanted, a wallet that would exactly fit a passport while carrying enough cards and cash for pretty much any occasion. So the idea being kind of a be-all end-all that would fit into a breast pocket of a jacket, for example. I've not made a wallet like this before, but from my experience making card holders in a similar style, the most important thing to get right, in my opinion, is how you make the pockets. The card pockets, that is. It's really essential to skive the lower side of the pockets as evenly as you possibly can, to the point where there's almost nothing at the base, so it's extremely thin. Because when I've not done this properly in the past, I've ended up with creases that show through from the front of the pockets. And the other thing is, I like to keep a bit of extra material where the pockets meet on the outside edges. It's kind of hard to explain, but if you just have them butting up against each other with no overlap, you're going to see gaps, and it just doesn't look good at all. Another thing I've been doing a lot of lately is the edge creasing, which is something that was common in leather products from like 20th century. And I just find that it adds a level of sophistication that you don't see quite so much anymore. One thing I do like to do is completely burnish and finish all of the top edges of all of my pockets before I glue anything down, because trying to do this later is a lot more difficult and will end up getting pretty messy. The card pockets themselves are one of the most time-consuming parts of this whole project, and unfortunately I don't have machines that can help me with cutting or skiving or punching the holes or stitching, so all of this has to be done by hand. I am thinking about, at the very least, having a die made up for the pockets to at least save me the cutting portion. But even then, I just don't see myself selling these wallets in bulk, because I would just have to charge silly prices to make up for all the time it takes me. So right now, I just make them for friends or on a commission basis. This silver stuff is something I just bought recently from Rocky Mountain. And it's like a self-adhesive RFID blocking layer that you can put between layers. I'll have to test out after how good it is at actually blocking cards, but for my first time using it, I'm pretty impressed with how easy it is to work with, and it does seem to bond quite nicely to the leather. And it's also thin enough that you don't really notice it's there. To line the inside pockets, I used the French veg tan, because I just wanted a smooth surface on the inside to make it easier to take passports, cards, things like that when you're taking them in and out. Before I can attach the inside panels to the middle section, I have to stitch and finish the inside edges, which will form the open sides of those pockets. To further add to the refined look that I'm trying to create here, I'm using a French style pricking iron, which has a narrow spacing, I think it's about 0.3, and I'm using a very thin thread, which of course this does take a lot longer than using a standard 0.4 iron because there's a lot more holes for any given length. For now I'm going to skip showing you the edge painting because I'll be going into a lot more detail on my process for that towards the end of the video. But the main thing I'd like to point out here is the importance of roughing up the edges prior to gluing. When I first started in leatherworking a few years ago, I kind of treated gluing like it was just a way to hold everything together until you'd finish stitching. But it really didn't take me long to realize that glue is what protects the integrity of those edges for years to come. So taking your time to really get this right is just so important. And if after working on something for a while and stitching it, the glue starts to come loose, I make sure I take the time to go back over at the end and fill in anywhere that the edges have started to peel. The back, or the outside piece, whatever you want to call it, of the wallet is essentially the same size as the interior section. I've just added a few millimeters to the top to make sure that it encloses everything nicely. And because I do want a uniform look across the whole wallet without any flesh showing through, I decided to add a strip to the top and the bottom inside edges of that back piece. Now that the inner piece of the wallet is glued up, I'm stitching the top edges of this, and I'm then finishing, including sanding and painting, the top edges of both sections, being the inside and the outside, to make sure that I'm getting a nice smooth edge before I glue everything together in the final stage. Speaking of final stage, we're technically getting towards the end of this build, but unfortunately there's still a ton of hard work to do. This is where it gets really quite challenging, because it's kind of make or break. If I mess up any one step going forward, this is where the entire wallet could be ruined. So I'm taking my time to very carefully glue everything, making sure everything's square, and making sure that when I'm doing my stitching, all of my holes are perfectly straight, because these stitches are going to be seen on both the inside and the outside of the wallet. So any slight cock up here can just, as I said, ruin the whole thing. But if that wasn't difficult enough, now I have the challenge of getting perfect painted edges all around the wallet. For the first layer, I like to do kind of a thin layer, just like really rubbing it into the grain to make sure it sticks. Of course, I'm sanding the edges first with something like a 300 or 400 grit. Then I do what I think most people probably do, which is just gently heating the edges. But the key thing here is I personally found that the heatable edge paints, the ones that specifically say they are heatable, are just much better. I'm then just essentially repeating the painful process of paint, sand, etc., etc. Doing spot filling where I need to, which is super important on this project because I have quite a few layers in some areas, and inevitably depressions will form. After I think 4 or 5 rounds of this, I finally have a smooth, even edge. So I'm doing one more layer, which I'm leaving for a few hours before sanding back again. And then I'm doing a final thicker layer, which I'm probably leaving for an hour or so. And this is where my method might differ a bit from others, and this is why I think it's important to have a heatable edge paint, because I'm going to apply a pretty decent amount of heat to the edge. And then I'm going over it with an edge beveler to try and even out and sort of smooth everything. And I'm paying particular attention to the edges, making sure that everything is being smoothed down and that you get a nice seamless transition from the leather to the edge paint. What I'm essentially trying to replicate here is when you would use a heated creasing iron to do this. Instead, I'm just heating it up and using a wooden burnisher instead. Even though it already looks shiny at this point, I'm actually doing a final sand with 3000 grit sandpaper, which will make it look matte. But it just helps to smooth over everything, and more importantly, will highlight any issues that I missed. And then I'm just finishing off with a few passes of isopropyl. Again, I'm really making sure that I'm getting those edges. But that's it pretty much. Not the best edges in the world, but that's just the way I figured out that works for me. I personally prefer them not to be too shiny. You don't add anything on top. What I do at the end of every build anyway is I'll get some Smith's Leather Balm, apply it onto the whole thing, including the edges, and I'm going to buff it onto those edges, which will give it a slight satin sheen. While this project was certainly a test of my patience, I think, more than anything else, it's one which is incredibly valuable because it forces you to do basic skills well. As usual, pattern is available on the website, free for anybody that watches the videos, that follows the channel. Let me know how it goes. I'd love to see your finished result. Ping me on Instagram. I'm going to be over there quite a bit more going forward. So anyway, until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.